You're listening to another ambitious entrepreneurnetwork.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
This is Women in Leadership Podcast, featuring success insights from women around the globe. Now, over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of Women in Leadership Podcast, brought to you by the Influence Alliance, the business building community for coaches and consultants who want to build a profitable and scalable business. Now, my guest today says no amount of denying happiness will diminish loss. Life is to be lived. Loss is inevitable and happiness should always be embraced. And joining me on today's show is Lisa Kaplin. Lisa is a psychologist. She's also a professional certified coach, and she teaches others how to be coaches, giving numerous talks around communication, around executive presence, as well as leadership. Now, she considers herself a life coach for the business world, and that often the issues that show up at work also show up in our personal lives. And when we figure out one aspect and we figure that out, we influence other aspects of our lives as well. So on today's show, she's going to share network. It's important to be networking. Also, keep going even if it is only one tiny step at a time. And what are you most afraid of? Do that first. So welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I'm happy to be here.
We've got so much to cover and really want to dive into this. But for those of you who are listening and watching live, you have the opportunity, if you want to also participate. So if you've got any comments or questions you want to ask of Lisa, add them in the comment box, and then I'll introduce those as we go along. But Lisa, back to what we were talking about today around networking. I mean, now is a time where I have found the opportunity to network far more, particularly online, even though we are now here in Melbourne, Australia, in our 200th day of lockdown, I believe. But I've been doing more networking than I have ever done over the last kind of 18 months or so. Just share a little bit more about that. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, because you're also a psychologist, where we find ourselves, whatever situation, it really depends on our mindset and our attitude, doesn't it, on how best we move forward. So speak a little bit about that too, if you would.
So both parts, I think they tie so nicely together. For me, my business really took off when I started to network, when I started to connect with other people. That helped my mindset, right? So I met other people. I started to learn from them, particularly women. That's who I networked with a lot at the very beginning. The connection, we all thrive in connection. So having the connection, learning about other people, them learning about me, it all just built on itself. It helped me with my mindset as well. I observed how other people were showing up, how they were talking about their businesses, which helped me. It's really hard at first, right? I was talking to a new business owner earlier today, and she said it's just so stressful at the beginning. It's hard to get out there. That's why the networking piece is such a huge aspect of this.
Yeah. Share a little bit more about, I guess, some of the things and insights that you've learned, because what you mentioned there from this woman that you were speaking to, that it is difficult to get out. I also think too, if I look back, it's finding the flow that fits in best and being able to give yourself permission to look, it's just a conversation. Don't put parameters around that, which maybe you've heard other people say, well, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that. I mean, women, we're naturally good. Well, I mean, I know I'm generalizing, but typically we're naturally good at conversation. Find your style and approach and give yourself permission to do that. But what are some insights that you've learned along the way?
I think the biggest one is, if you're going to have a conversation with somebody, have a conversation, ask questions, make it a mutual conversation versus I'm just going to tell you about me. And then, oh, it's been nice talking to you. Bye. That's never going to be a successful way. I try to ask more questions of somebody. Tell me about yourself, about your business. What are the things you're working on? And I really, to your point, making it your own comfort zone. A lot of people said, oh, you have to have a call to action. You have to sell right in that conversation. I actually found that icky, for lack of a better word. And really the conversations led to more real relationships over time, so that people either referred to me or they hired me, or they spoke well of me to somebody else. I know when I've met people and all they're doing is selling to me, or they're only talking about themselves, I'm not likely to refer them to anybody else because there's
Yeah.
not a good connection.
And I love the way that you said, take the time to build that relationship. And what I'd love for you to also share a little bit more, because I'm sure that you've got some insights on this. Sometimes we're told, go in for the conversation. These are the things that you need to do, and then walk away with the sale. I mean, I would rather spend more time building the relationship. And so that may mean that you might have follow-up conversations as well. Share a little bit more about the process that you follow, because this is obviously a process that you have that works well for you. And
Right.
by sharing that, other people, I'm hoping, will go, you know what, that kind of fits me too. These are the things that I'll look at. What am I doing and what fits in with my style and approach? So
Right.
what is sort of your process?
So my process is to literally my goal of the conversation is to get to know somebody. That is my goal. And maybe I can help them with, as they might want to hire me. Maybe I can help them or support them in some other way. Maybe it's just a nice, friendly conversation. One of my favorite stories is I met a woman at a networking event. She was a guest. She reached out and said, "I'd like to go out for coffee with you." This is obviously pre-COVID. We met for coffee. We had a great conversation, and 5 years later, she hired me. 5 years. Um, but she said, "I wasn't ready at the time. I loved the conversation with you. I kept your card. I thought about you." And she actually followed me on my website. So I send out a weekly blog. She read my blog. 5 years later, she hired me. I'd rather have that because it was
Yes.
very natural. It was authentic. It was the right time for her than me pushing to sell her at that time. And it wasn't, then no one wins in that space. It's not a good working relationship that way. This was a true win-win. She was ready. So I think that getting comfortable with that conversation is the first conversation. Now, some people might hire you on the spot. Great. That's fantastic. They're ready to go. Some people might not. In fact, they might never hire you, but that's still a good relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Something that you mentioned too, that you had a conversation, and be curious about other people, because you never know who you may have in your network that is providing a solution or support that can really support the person to whom you're speaking with. And
Mhm.
sharing those resources and connecting those people, I think, is just part of that whole relationship building, isn't it? Because
Really.
that adds value to you as an individual to say, well, you're a trustworthy person who's got some
Mhm.
really great connections. So that's certainly something that we can continue to do. But also too, would you say that sometimes people who would say to you, well, Lisa, I've been doing a lot of networking and I don't have those kind of stories. Are you clear on what it is that you do and how you can help people, so that when you get an opportunity to share what you do, that other person says, I get it. And I can now think about people who I might have in my network that are struggling with what Lisa can support them with, so I can connect the two. Would you say one of the reasons maybe people are not generating any results from networking is because they haven't clarified what they can do, who they can support?
100%. And even some people who are kind of clear or a little more clear on what they do, they don't say it in a way that. So I go to a networking group, or we get a 1 minute elevator pitch. If in that 1 minute it's not 100% clear about what I do, and I don't really sell myself in that 1 minute, who's no one's going to call me. And
Yes.
so I think people are not networking well. you
Yeah.
you really have to be clear. You have to be able to say it in under a minute often, and you've got to be excited about it. This is what I do. I'm excited about it. Here's what it is.
Yeah.
I That's a huge piece. It's like um ineffective networking, and it's not because they don't want to be. I think often people don't know how to be effective networkers.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. And, it wasn't to, and I mentioned earlier that I've probably done more networking. I have done more networking now than I have ever done in the last 18 months than I have ever done in my entire life of business, because I'm naturally an introvert. So I'm not going to go out and have these conversations. It took me a little while to find my flow. And then all of a sudden it clicked and I went, I get this. And I actually love the connecting. I found the way that an introvert networks, who loves those deeper conversations and
Well,
loves prefers that more one-on-one. So find your flow, and then just continue to do that. But certainly make sure that your message is clear, because you may be having wonderful conversations, but people are leaving thinking, I'd love to help that person, but I'm not really sure what they do. Let's
Yeah.
talk into the next point that you want to share, because keep going, even if it is only one step at a time. And we can relate that to what we're talking about, networking. But what about, I mean, many of us now are faced with complexities, even in the circumstances around us, that has,
Right.
requiring us to adapt. And
Yeah.
sometimes for those of us who may not like to adapt very much and change, I'm the opposite. I love change. But what can you share some insights that, look, just keep going one step at a time?
It can be anything to you, and I'm talking to moms these days with kids at home, or all the chaos that's going on at the United States. It's really pretty much a mess. And I say, what's one little thing you could do today for your business? You could send a quick email. You could write a post on social media saying, hey, we're all stressed. I'm here for you if you need to talk. A little something, just a tiny little something that leads you to feeling like you're moving forward in some way. So many little things we can do. People tend to think, if I'm going to post on social media, it has to be like this, War and Peace, this whole novel. No, it doesn't. You could put a lovely quote or a picture of a flower. People need a little sunshine and happiness right now. So anything that you can bring that shows a little bit of you, whether personally or professionally, is a step forward.
Yes, yeah. And also too, I think, if I think back, my children are all older, so I don't have to juggle, homeschooling and a lot of other myriad of tasks. But one of the things that if I reflect back to when I did have to do that, so often as women, we feel like we have to do everything. We have to show up 100% in all of those areas. But something that my mother shared with me years ago, that she was told by an uncle, he said to her, the season in your life is to be a mum, and do that to the glory of God. I mean, we're Christians, so that's what, he said, do that to the glory of God. And then next season, when that changes a little bit, then you can step fully into the other areas. So if we are running a business, yet we need to homeschool, don't let the guilt, oh, I really should be doing that, and I really should be doing that, because that in itself can really inhibit everything, isn't it? So what
Right.
season, what is in front of you now, do that. Release the other things. Speak a bit more about that from a psychologist's point of view, because it's easy to say, but far more difficult to do, I think. So, what are some insights you can share around that we can release some of those other things which we may want to be doing, but just at this moment in time, focus on this, because this is going to also support us as individuals.
Absolutely. Well, and I want to point out, because people sometimes will say, well, that's coming from a place of privilege. No doubt that is accurate. Even if it's not coming from a place of privilege, how helpful is it to feel guilty?
Yeah.
Typically not helpful at all. How helpful is it to beat up on yourself for not getting something done? Not helpful at all. So the concept of, I'm going to do what I can do right now, and I'm going to leave the rest behind because I can't control it,
Yeah.
is really the best way to be in that moment, whether it's with your children, whether it's on your business. It's to truly, truly be in that moment, and really to say to yourself, when I'm able, I will get to that peace,
Yes.
and allow that grace that really has to happen
Yeah.
ultimately for us to be fully present and enjoy what we're doing.
Yeah. Because I think, when you think about all of the things that we can be doing, and, there's a saying, well, we can do everything and we can have everything. You can, but not all in the one time,
And
It's
maybe
interesting,
not well.
coming from a place of privilege. Speak a little bit more about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, I don't know if privilege it's a word we're using a little more in the States. I don't know about in Australia, but it means, I know there's food on my table. I know that I have a roof over my head. So it's easy for me to say, yeah, don't worry about that other thing. Just focus on your kids, because I don't actually have to worry about those other things. So
Yes.
there is a place of privilege with that. Whereas maybe a single mother has to put food on her table and take care of her kids, and my advice still would be somewhat similar, in that take one thing at a time, do one thing at a time, because that's really all you can control. but also to know that I'm not in my shoes are different. And
Yeah.
I really want to hold space for that someone else's experience can be different or less privileged than mine.
Yeah. It's interesting you should say that because, when I hear someone, and let's unpack this a little bit, because sometimes, and I don't know if there's a term for this, and share if you've got this. So we may be okay. And so let's use me as an example, beat me up. That's okay. I've got thick skin. So, I don't have children, yet I can, not feel sorry. That's not right. I recognize that it is going to be more to manage for people who do have children at home and run a business. But what I'm not going to do is take guilt on myself to say, oh, I feel so guilty that I am here not with children. Does that make sense? Why would we then take on that experience or that mindset that we feel guilt? I mean, that just
No,
doesn't. Is that so?
no.
Exactly what you're saying. Sometimes as women, we can do that. That we can start? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I think you're bringing up a good point on a couple of pieces. One is my awareness of someone else's situation, my privilege, and maybe theirs is not for me to own guilt because who's that going to help? That's not going to
Yeah.
help her or me. That's
Yeah.
definitely not. It's more to be compassionate, to hold space that the experience is different. And I think guilt of any sort, and women are notoriously good at it, not helpful.
No, not helpful at all. And guess what? That woman who may have additional thing, how dare we say we feel sorry for you because she said, "Look, I've got this. I've
Right,
got that." So in other words, so
right.
be mindful because we can then take on other people that we assume that's what's going on for them, but they go, "You know what? You deal with your stuff because I've got mine under control." Even though yes, it may be a
100%.
little bit more yeah.
Right. It's also condescending to
Yes.
have pity. It's not really. I think the idea here is not to have pity, but really to say, "Oh wow, your experience is different."
Yeah.
Tell me how I can help.
Yeah.
How can I
Yeah.
support you in your
Yes.
experience being different than mine, or at least that we have an awareness of a different experience.
Yeah, because there's so much going on, isn't there? Even underlying, and I know from a psychologist point of view, you see the motive or what's driving that behaviour. And we hear a lot of people that start saying, well, that comment offended me. Well, I just want to say, really? Well, just stop it. It's like that, and I know it's easy, but it's like, why? Why would you bring that on yourself? Everyone's entitled. You know what I mean? So anyway, when I say entitled, they've
There's
got
an
their own opinions and stuff. Don't let what someone else says offend
right,
you. Why
right,
would you, so
right,
which is a whole other topic on its own.
for
But I love the way that you said, appreciate, show compassion. But I remember a term that one of my coaches mentioned, and it's so true. Compassionate detachment. So you're detached from that because otherwise, if you get caught up in
sure.
that, then you can't help someone
Right. We
from
call
that
it in
point.
the coaching world, we call it detached involvement,
Yes.
which means I care very much, but I'm not attached to your outcome. I care about you. I'm present for you. I'll hold space for you. But me being attached to your outcome is not good for either of us.
Yeah, exactly. And you
Right.
want people that are around you in that space. So be mindful about, the people that you surround yourself with, I think, because the people who you want to surround yourself are going to support you and be there as you're taking that one step. They're
Right.
not going to get on board and get into the, well, woe is you kind of thing. I don't want people to do that. I want you to go, I'm sorry. Yep, that's terrible. Let's move forward. I want them to go,
Let's,
right, lift up, forward, let's go kind of
let's
thing.
go.
Because, those,
Empowering people.
yeah, it is. It is. Let's talk about what you are most afraid of. Do that first. All right, let's talk about this. What can you share here?
Well, almost always that I see with my clients, whether they're wanting to be business owners or they're in the corporate world, is there's something they're afraid of, and that one thing that they're afraid of, being ashamed, being embarrassed, not knowing enough, whatever it is, that's the thing that's holding them back. And
Mm,
so I always say, take that thing and go do it. If your biggest fear is that you're gonna make a fool out of yourself, you know what, go make a fool out of yourself and see that you're gonna live through it. Go
yes.
through it. Ask a question that oh, what if my boss thinks I'm dumb? Then your boss thinks you're dumb. Keep going. Like it's that little fear that keeps us from taking the risks that actually lead us to growth.
Yeah. It's interesting. you should say that, Lisa, because I think my husband was at a meeting and on Zoom, and he asked a question because he's not one to hold anything back. He's direct and to the point. And it was interesting. He asked the question, and after the meeting, a few people said, "I'm so glad you asked that question. I had that too, but I was a little bit hesitant to bring that forward." So it's not just women that can
Oh,
have
for
that,
sure.
but men
Oh,
too. Because what's interesting, we can take our own perception and that inner critic, all of that, and really cloud our judgment of things, isn't it? Or prejudgment or appreciation of certain circumstances. Would you also say that sometimes when we're looking at doing something, is to also look behind, well, what's driving that fear?
hmm Well,
Yeah.
that's a huge coaching question is what makes you afraid of that? Where did that fear come from? What are you telling yourself about that situation or that fear? And often when I'll say to my client, tell me the story you're telling yourself about that fear, and they tell me, and then they go, well, that was kind of stupid, and then
They actually voice it out loud and they hear themselves. Yes.
they go, "Well, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't even say anything. I'm just like listening." And then they say, "Well, yeah, I'll survive that." And which is often a question I'll ask. I'll say, "So you said your biggest fear was making a fool out of yourself in the meeting. Let's say you make a fool out of yourself in the meeting. Can you live with that?" And if they say yes, I go, "Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Then you're ready to go."
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, I mean, what classifies making a fool of yourself?
Right?
If
Exactly.
other people don't agree with you, that's okay. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but can we unpack this a little bit? I
Right.
mean, specify what evidence do you need that you would be a fool of yourself?
Yep.
Wearing a clown hat or something, people laughing at you. That laugh may be an appreciation.
Right.
There's
It's
so
a
many
story.
different aspects. It is
Exactly.
so
It's a story
true.
and it's subjective. Right.
Yeah.
There's not an
Yeah.
objective meter of making a fool of yourself.
No.
Right.
And another thing that I think we can really look at, what you're speaking into, is that whole, particularly around sharing our message. Going and doing Facebook Lives or going on a podcast interview, starting your own podcast, that inner critic saying, well, who on earth would want to listen to me? Who's interested in my content? How do I dare put myself forward as someone who knows something about that? I mean, you can really use the concept of what you're speaking about to this situation too, yes?
100%. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That often that we call it imposter syndrome. Do you use that as well in
Yes.
Australia? We call it imposter syndrome that who am I to, be a coach or be a leader or have a podcast? And as soon as we hear those words, that's a great opportunity to say, well, I am actually someone who knows the answers to these. I am good at this, to remind ourselves like I actually trained to become a coach or a psychologist or
Yes.
I know a lot of information to run a podcast and to remind ourselves of our skills and our qualities and all the things that we bring.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, who are you not? It kind of aligns with that Marianne Peterson, I think, who
Yes,
said, "Who are you not?"
right.
Um,
How dare you not bring your fabulous self to the table? Right.
exactly, exactly. And I'm a firm believer, and I've seen it over, having done thousands of interviews. Everyone has a unique story and journey that they have walked, and through that have come up with principles, steps, methodologies, ways that they have overcome those challenges. Now, I am sure that someone who is currently in the situation that you were maybe decades ago, if you've got a faster way of getting through that, if you've got words of hope and inspiration, empowerment, wouldn't you think that they would like to hear that?
Exactly. Why
No.
would they? I mean, I've learned so much from my own mentors, from other people that I've worked with, from my own coaches that I've hired. I've learned so much. Why would you like if I could skip a few steps and just get to that next place? Why
Yes.
not?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I can just imagine if someone were sitting across a boardroom table from you 10 years later and you shared something about how you could, how you're now supporting someone. Wouldn't you think that they would lean across the table and say, I wish you would have told me that 10 years ago, because we would
Yes.
be sitting here years, far more quicker. And So let's unpack that just a little bit. We've got a little bit more time, and then I'd love for you to share how people can get in touch with you. That whole imposter syndrome, I think it's something that many of us can relate to, no matter what stage of our career that we're in. I think people would be surprised at if people that I'm sure we admire, that we've seen on stage, that we're regularly listening to and watching, in some shape or form, maybe not every day, but certainly at times throughout the year or so, has that inkling of, but you know what? They just get out there and do it anyway. Share a little bit more about some of the things that we can do to help us to take that one tiny step forward to address that imposter syndrome.
Well, one is be aware of the imposter syndrome. Like, really hear the story you're telling yourself. I'm not good enough to do this. Who do I think I am? And hear it without judgment. Like, oh, there's that imposter syndrome. Huh. I must be about to take a big risk, because that's when that imposter syndrome actually shows up. And to be aware of it, accept it, and then choose what you want to do. Am I going to let that imposter syndrome voice stop me from doing something that I know I'm good at and where I can bring value? And what you would do to a dear friend or a sister, or, a mentor or a mentee, you'd say, of course you're qualified to do that. Go out there and go do that. Same thing to yourself. Plant a seed. I've got this. I'm going to go do it, and walk into it. That's the only way to manage imposter syndrome, is to walk into it and do your thing. It's the
Yeah.
only way.
Yeah. I love the way that you have just expressed the importance of recognition first, having that awareness, because then we can start to see patterns come up. And I love the way, and I'll draw our attention back to when I introduced you. You said, when you figure out one aspect of your life, it often affects, influences another aspect of your life as well. And, I'm sure as a psychologist, you also say how something is showing up in one area of your life will somehow be impacting other areas of your life. And so, what other areas in your life may be impacting you that you're not stepping out, that you're not sharing your voice, because I think we're in a time in everybody around the world, we need to hear voices of inspiration, hope, possibility. You may have the solution, or a voice, a story, a message that is going to change culture, maybe in your immediate community, but that filters out. And we've got the technology now, don't we, Lisa, to be able to, you and I are sitting on opposite sides of the planet.
So cool.
And I think we've all proven that what can happen in one side of the world can shut down the entire world. So how about we use that concept and start to share a virus of possibility and hope that cuts through the fear mongering that is going around in the doom and gloom. Let's spread a virus of hope and possibility. Lisa, how can people find out more about who you are, what you do, how you may be able to support them?
Well, you can definitely find me on my website. It's lisakaplin.com, Kaplin. That's how we spell it. Blame my husband. Or you can email me at lisa@lisakaplin.com. I'm pretty easy to find. And I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, those places. So you can find me there. I'm happy to get on a call anytime and talk about what I do and hear about what other people are doing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So please reach out to Lisa. And before we finish up the show, we'll go back to the networking point. You and I met at a networking event. It was a online boardroom meeting that we ran through Lisa Fisk and Leadership Global, which is a fantastic organization. And it just goes to show that we are here today having this conversation because of networking opportunities. And it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today, Lisa. I know that we've also had a private conversation as well, which kind of led to featuring you on the show. So get out there and network. It doesn't matter if you are not able to travel, or able to, even for us, we're not even allowed to leave 5 kilometers from our home. Doesn't matter. We can network around the globe. In fact, I start off today, I'm interviewing you over in the US. What part of the US are you in, Lisa?
Chicago. I'm in Illinois.
Chicago. And then I finish tonight in UK. So I am traveling the globe
You're
today.
moving.
I'm doing the full
virtual
circle
move.
of the globe today, and
Love
from the
that.
comfort of my own office. So there you go. Well, look, Lisa, it's been such a treat speaking with you today, and please reach out to Lisa. As you can tell, she's got some great insights to share and can certainly support you in whatever endeavors that you need. So thanks once again, Lisa.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series.